Welcome to part 3 of creating a cutout animation. This video is just a continuation from part 2. As mentioned in the previous video, all the animation is being performed by Stacy Eberschlag. At this moment, he's working on the pacing and timing of the animation by moving around the keyframed key poses. So Stacy's using the keyboard shortcuts apostrophe and semicolon to scroll between the keyframes in the timeline view. So he's using the transform tool to move around body parts, and at times he displaces the pivot point to be able to make rotations from a different pivot point. So using the keyboard shortcut B, he can move up a hierarchy chain, so from the foot to the shin to the leg. Or the opposite way, if you select a parent, you can use Shift plus B to go down the chain towards the child, such as the arm to the forearm to the hand. So now in the timeline view, he's selecting 4 keyframes and dragging them down the line. Then he just turned the first keyframe into a motion keyframe by clicking on the 5th button in the timeline view toolbar. Then he added a keyframe on the arrow where the computer had generated a pose, so on the interpolation. By adding a keyframe on the area where the interpolation was, he's then allowing himself to tweak that pose that the computer had generated. If there was no keyframe there, he would not be able to manipulate the pose on the motion tweened areas. So you can turn a keyframe into a motion keyframe, so a keyframe that has interpolation or motion tweening, in other words, computer-generated drawings between 2 keyframes, by selecting it in the timeline view and clicking on the 5th button in the timeline view toolbar. You can then decide to change a motion keyframe into a stop motion keyframe, so a keyframe without interpolation, by selecting it in the timeline view and clicking on the 6th button in the timeline view toolbar. You can then decide to add a keyframe on a blank cell by clicking on the 3rd button in the timeline view toolbar, so the KF with the burgundy circle and white plus sign, or you can use the keyboard shortcut Command or Control F6. You can delete keyframes by selecting them in the timeline view and clicking on the 4th button in the timeline view toolbar, so the KF with the minus sign. You cannot actually delete keyframes by using the delete key, as that will delete the drawing underneath it. So Stacy's about to do two intricate things here. He's going to turn on the onion skin and then play with the squash and stretch. So I'm going to describe the onion skin first and then go back to the squash and stretch. So the onion skin button is the last one in the toolbar on the left hand side. And what it does is it allows you to see the two previous drawings and two of the next drawings of whatever body part is selected. So in this case, it's the entire right arm. You can actually add body parts or remove body parts from the onion skin through the view menu at the top. So view, show onion skin, and I think there's a few options like show selected, hide unselected, things like that. Or if you look at the layers in the timeline view, beside the lock icon, there's what looks like a stack of pancakes, and they're all grayed out. If you click on any one of those, then you should be able to turn on the onion skinning for a specific layer as well. So by default, whatever layer selected, you see the onion skinning for, and you can add layers by clicking on the onion skin icon of that layer. Also, but on the playhead, if you go back a little bit, on the red playhead, you'll notice there's blue bars flanking each side of the playhead. If you pull or push on those, you can add the number of previous and next drawings that you see in the onion skin view. So to go back to the squash and stretch, you notice that Stacy was playing with the arm, and up until this point he's only been moving body parts and rotating them, but this is the first time he actually used the skewing feature of the transform tool, and that's to pull the arm and make it longer than it naturally is. And in animation, when you do something called stretching, so it's usually squash or stretch, you stretch, it kind of gives it that elastic feel, that animated feel, that lifelike feel, or an exaggerated feel. So that's why you might do something like that. It's sort of the snap back for a movement, after you anticipate it happening, it's kind of this fast follow through. So the next two things that Stacy's about to do are pretty important. He just found the Karate Rabbit master peg, and then by using the keyboard shortcut P, he's adding a peg to the network view. Then by holding down the Alt button, he's connecting it between the multi-port in and the Karate Rabbit master peg. Then by going to the Tools toolbar on the left-hand side, he's disabling the Animate mode, so the button with the yellow circle on it. Then he's selecting the entire Karate Rabbit and scaling it down. Because the Animate mode has been turned off, anything he's doing at this point is not being recorded, but is being done to the animation in terms of setup. So now by moving and scaling the Karate Rabbit, it'll be in that position and at that size for the entire sequence that he's already keyframed. So it's like a compositing or like a setting up tool when you're using the transform tool without the Animate mode on. So Stacy's using the play button in the playback toolbar at the top to watch his animation again and again to get a feeling for the movement and the timing to see if it all seems to fit well. That or he often grabs the red playhead and scrubs back and forth across the keyframes. I think he's starting to notice that the Karate Rabbit sits in front of the door instead of behind it like it should. So now he's opening the top view so he can view all the elements through an aerial perspective. The Karate Rabbit's highlighted in red. So going to the advanced animation toolbar, he's selected the translation tool, and as he pulls the Karate Rabbit back into space, it gets slightly smaller. If he used the maintain size tool instead, the Karate Rabbit would appear to remain the same size as it's being pulled back, which means it's actually being scaled bigger to make it look like it stayed the same size. So that's the difference between the translation and the maintain size tool. So with the loop button turned on, the animation will play in an infinite loop until you click on the play button again to stop it, so it's sort of like a stop-start button. So these last three videos have been pretty good in giving you a gauge of how long it might take to create an animated sequence. So it took a professional animator roughly an hour and 15 minutes to make 90 frames of animation. So that's about 3 seconds of animation. Obviously you have to take into account differing factors of complexity, etc., but at least it gives you a rough idea. So that's pretty much it for the tutorial, Creating a Simple Cutout Animation Part 3. Stay tuned for the next video, Creating a Simple Cutout Animation Part 4.